Welcome back, class, to the final day of the semester. I want to meet with you briefly to give you an overview, wrap up of the class, and some review of the material. I want to start by saying that this has been a very unusual semester. I think it's one that we're not going to forget, and this has been a really important one for me to spend time with you and to share some sociological knowledge with you that I hope you will take with you, and it'll continue to be important to your lives and to your continued education. I also want to start by saying that I have learned that a second member of our class unfortunately has lost someone to COVID-19. And this is something that if we were in class, we would have a moment of silence. So I want to share my condolences, and I hope that you will reflect on this tragedy and remember your class members right now. I hope that all of you will continue to be safe and that we won't hear of other news like this. We don't know when this disease is going to actually wrap up or whether we're going to be able to get on top of it soon. I'm hopeful. I also want to give us our land acknowledgement again. We acknowledge the Tuscarora people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we work and live, and recognize their continued connection to the land, water, and air that Greenville consumes. We pay respect to 8 recognized tribes: Kahari, Eastern Band of Cherokee, Haliwi Saponi, Lumbee, Meherrin, Occaneechi Band of Saponi, and Waccamaw Siouan, all nations, and their elders past, present, and emerging. As a class, I want to invite you to think about taking more sociology classes, think about becoming a minor, a major, or even think about our graduate program. I'm already talking with one of you about our graduate program. And I also want to remind you to fill out your SSOI, your Student Opinion of Instruction. That's due at 11:59 tonight, and I'm speaking to you on a Thursday. So I would look forward to your feedback on this class. So I think we're not going to forget this semester very easily, right? We were studying as our society was erupting in unpredictable ways, and also as the world in many ways is erupting in unpredictable ways. Some of it tragic, some of it hopeful. Think about how sociology is relevant to the current moment. And I think that certainly the current moment is one where we are very dependent on medical science, on many other disciplines, on criminal justice, on psychology. But also I'm hearing many sociologists who were interviewed on the news because we're recognizing that there are all of these social issues that sociologists study and can help get a handle on. Things that we have been researching for generations now are quite relevant to what we're going through. I wanted to mention one that I might have mentioned before, which is, what about that term social distance? There are sociologists who don't think we should be using that term. Why are we using it? Because we're not really distancing ourselves socially. In fact, we are trying to remain connected socially. I read that about 50% of Americans have created a social bubble, and that is they're spending time with family members or friends that they trust, that they know are not exposing themselves, and therefore they're getting to continue to interact. And in fact, I'm going to be doing that with my own family next week. So maybe we need a term like public distance or physical distance. I don't know if it'll catch on, but feel free to try those out and see if we can get those terms to go viral. Remember, we started this semester with the terms norms and anomie, and I'm glad that we did that, and also I'm glad that we started this semester talking about social movements and activism as a way to connect with what's going on around us and what we're reading in our books. And I wanted to add, just remember that anomie is about that state of normlessness or perception that norms are not there, that norms are confused, maybe the norms are not being monitored or punished. But I want to add that sociologists are not saying that when we're in a state like that, that it excuses behavior necessarily. So I'll use the example of people who are going on rants in stores about the mask requirements, which, by the way, the same thing happened during the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. There's a story of a woman who went on a rant and she filmed herself doing that in a Target store where she tore down a display requiring masks. She unfortunately, that led to all of her clients disappearing from her company that she owned. She lost all her clients, and her husband filed for divorce. And I'm quite sad for her. She is now apologizing. She's saying that she was wrong, and she did record that. So it's telling us a lot about how media is having this impact on our real lives, right? What goes on the screen actually comes back to haunt us sometimes. And she's getting help for her psychological issues, which might have actually preceded this. But she's saying that the pandemic has really cost her some of her mental wellness. And I think that's not going to be the only case that we are going to hear about. In fact, I read this morning that they are predicting that potentially we could lose in our country 150,000 people to mental health issues during the pandemic, whether it's from suicide, from alcohol dependence, from drug overdose. And that's quite a disturbing number to think about. The other thing that this example brings up is what you might have heard about called cancel culture. Right now, we're seeing that people can tweet something and then they can lose jobs and they can lose their social lives, family members, and others. I think that someday you're going to start to see sociology books written about cancel culture if they're not being written right now as we speak. And so we'll see what happens with that particular trend. I also want to bring up something else in the news, which was the death of Congressman John Lewis. You might have known about his life and work. Very famous as part of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. He was one of the people who marched in Selma, Alabama by crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. He and many of his co-marchers were attacked violently by police. He had his skull fractured in that incident. And a reminder that he was seen as a radical at that time. He was not necessarily someone that most of the country looked up to. He became a congressman for the last, I believe, about 40 years and has been now very respected as a leader on civil rights issues and particularly on voting rights issues. So we honor his life. You might have heard he was laying in state in the Capitol this week. And there's also a call to rename that bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which was named for a segregationist, for a racist, and some want to rename the bridge after him, after John Lewis. Brings me to another topic, which is the other thing we're seeing right now is monument toppling, renamings. We've brought that up, I think, in the culture section, and it's happening as we speak. Asheville, North Carolina, you might have heard, is actually offering reparations. It's made national news, and what is meant by that is that they are working on a proposal to address things like housing and jobs for African Americans and come up with some kind of initiatives to tackle those. I know that it's controversial. There's some people who feel like it doesn't go far enough, but we'll follow that particular that particular place and what's going on. The other thing that happened this week is that UNC Chapel Hill is going to rename some of its buildings that have been named for people who had been slave owners, or those who were involved in the slave trade at some point. We've been talking about social construction, all right? So that's something that I think that's one of those overview terms that I hope you'll take with you, that sociology uses for a number of things, right? It's used for race, it's used for gender, It's used for deviance. Think about social construction. And I want to add to that some people are taking that by using the term, I don't see race. And there are many people of color who are saying they don't really care for that term, they don't see race, because they want you to see their race, right? They want you to recognize the way that their skin color, their particular physical characteristics are viewed as an other, are viewed as someone who perhaps is seen as someone not deserving of equal opportunities, of equal rights. So that term, don't see race, we don't really think of as part of this concept of social construction that we're talking about. Remember the invisible knapsack? I sent you an article about that, all the ways that white privilege goes around with us as a knapsack, and we don't even notice that we have these privileges, those of us who are white. And one of those that I remember one student in a previous class found interesting was, why do we call Band-Aids flesh colored when it's only one color of flesh, right, that those Band-Aids are reflecting? So what about that term flesh? I have been enjoying reading your responses to the book Evicted through both your discussion boards and your papers, and I'm finishing up the grading of those. And the book is very relevant to some of you. And actually, some of you got evicted from your dorms, possibly because of COVID. So your responses that I've been reading demonstrate that you really resonated with the use of the ethnographic method in this book and got some insights into this complex web of the eviction industry, the many layers of local level issues, as well as issues in the society at large and even the globe, right? If we think of the deindustrialization of many of American cities like Milwaukee, that has a lot to do with the globalization of the production of goods elsewhere. So one term I want to go over that I think you probably are having good practice with now is sociological imagination. Remember, that's the term that C. Wright Mills used to talk about how we have almost like an awakening to understand how certain kinds of private problems, personal problems, are actually public issues. So think about what we've just talked about today. How is the issue of having a psychological breakdown over mask wearing related to public issues, related to something that's going on more broadly in society? And I think it's actually more obvious right now to many people in society than it normally is, right? Because we're seeing how things like job loss are related to the way a society has to lock down under a pandemic. We're seeing that this is something that is broader than the individual, that it's something that is at the more societal, broader level. So I hope that you have learned about the sociological imagination and are exercising it yourself. Let's go over a few things from back when we started the semester, because I think those might be less present in your current memory. Remember that back when sociology was becoming a discipline, there were all of these major changes going on in the world. And so sociology is emerging at this intersection of these changes, and those changes are what sociology very much is about, right? The Industrial Revolution. So as factories were starting to appear, all kinds of things were going on in societies. People were migrating from the countryside to the cities. They were working in a different way than they were before. They were working in these large factories. They were living in these large tenement houses in places like Chicago. And so their lives were very different. Neighborhoods were very different. The workplace was very different. So that was one of the revolutions that we talk about. Another revolution that is coming about is the revolution in ideas, and particularly the rising popularity of the scientific method. And the universities and society, right? So sociology is one of those disciplines that's arising at this time when the scientific method is starting to have more and more appeal. It's starting to be something that societies and leaders are starting to pay attention to. And it's not that science was new, okay? We had science for generations before that. But at this point, in societies, and especially in Europe and the United States, that was starting to be founded at the time. The scientific method was seen as something that was important for actually structuring our academies around, and sociology was one of those new fields that basically is saying that society can be studied, that it's something that we can apply science to. So those are the main things that are going on in the world. One thing that also is very relevant is the revolution in democratic ideas, the fact that we have these new democracies, we have the end of monarchies in places like France. And so there's the rise of the individual, the idea of individual rights. I think research methods, I think by now are pretty clear to you, right? We've got quantitative and qualitative research methods. We are not a discipline that uses many experimental methods like they use in psychology, but some sociologists do use experimental methods. So we are actually a discipline that has a wide array of methods. You read about things like variables, independent and dependent variables, correlations between variables. And remember the question of, does correlation equal causation? Look that one up. I think you hopefully know what that's about. Remember the primary agents of socialization, and that came up in a lot of places this semester, right? How we are socialized into gender identities, into social class, into deviance, all kinds of ways that socialization is important. And again, not that it excuses bad behavior, but look at how peers, media, your families, and education are those agents that help to teach you the norms and influence you in various ways. Cultural relativism, look back at that one and think about how cultural relativism is relevant to how societies define deviance. Remember, we talked about funny local laws and how laws vary across cultures. Much of the exam will be reviews of some of the major ideas across the semester, but there may be a few more detailed questions that are about the chapters that you read for this week. Okay, so you might want to do a little more detailed look at the material from leisure and media, health and illness, and the environment. So those are some of the things that we've gone over, right? Leisure and media, we talked about free press and the democracy, the hypodermic needle theory and polysemy, right? The way that we interpret media, the commodification of leisure, the concentration of media companies into conglomerates, and then health and illness, a lot of terms that are very familiar to us right now as we're going through this pandemic, such as herd immunity. How are health disparities actually related to social class, race, and gender? And remember my point that the fact that so many more people are dying and getting COVID who are from African American communities, Latino communities as well, and indigenous communities. We are not saying that those are because of biology, right? That there are social reasons why they are at higher risk. And then environmentalism knows some of the challenges to that. There is the issue of resource extraction, non-renewable resources, as well as some of the ways that globalization is related to this. And for example, rich countries that are taking resources from poor countries. Evicted will certainly be on the exam. I think by now all of you are intimately familiar with that book, so I don't think I need to say much about that, but I have that on the study guide. I hope that this helps, and I'm looking forward to seeing how you do on your exams. I wish you all the best luck. This has been a really great semester for me, and I am hoping that I will meet some of you in person someday. Take care, and good luck starting fall semester for those of you who are continuing. Take care.